Good morning, everyone. I welcome you all to another episode of Engineering with Shamil. And today we are going to continue the Lucknow fire series. And in today's episode, we are going to discuss about the single staircase problem. Now, what was the single staircase problem? So, as we all know, on 22nd of June on 22nd of June 2026 at around 2:45 local time, it in the afternoon, there was a fire which broke out in a G+2 building, that is ground floor, first floor, second floor. In that building, the fire broke out. The cause of fire is unknown, and because of that fire, what happened was 15 people died because of that fire. Now, one of the many observations that was actually found was that the building was having only one staircase that was served as a one staircase which was actually served as the actual entrance, and that same staircase was used for the emergency exit purpose. So this staircase was actually a trap. This was actually a trap for the people who were there, because when the fire got erupted, the smoke and the blaze, it actually engulfed the entire staircase, and because of which the people who were there inside the building, they could not escape, and this became a trap. So this is when the only way to escape becomes faulty. That actually becomes the single point of failure. So that is how we call it as, that's how we call it in fire engineering, that if there is any if the point which if the what do you say uh, if the part which is actually supposed to serve as an escape route becomes faulty, if that is the only part available, then that becomes the single point of failure. So let us go into more detail what actually happened with respect to the single point of failure. So, as I said, the single point of failure, in the Lucknow fire incident, the building had exactly only one staircase, and the fire and smoke, it actually engulfed in within minutes. It just happened within minutes. Okay, and everyone above the ground floor was trapped, and there was no alternative route, there was no backup plan, and there was no chance to escape from the building. So, what is a single point of failure? So, single point of failure is basically a critical element. If if it is compromised, then the entire system is brought down. The entire system will become a failure if the critical element becomes compromised. So, in fire safety, what happens is, if there is only one exit for a particular facility, and that exit is served as the entrance, and that is the only way to come outside, and that is all that itself is compromised, then that becomes one point of failure. So when that exit fails, everyone inside the building will be at risk. So to overcome this, we have a solution, and that solution is redundancy. And redundancy is the only solution for such kind of buildings. That is, more than one alternative path needs to be established inside the building. Now, we need to know one important concept, and that is called as the means of egress. What do you mean by means of egress? So means of egress comprises of three parts. First of all, we need to know what is an egress path. So egress path is basically a continuous unobstructed path. That is, the path should be very clear, it should be continuous from any point in the building to a safe place outside. So that is called as the egress path. Now the egress path will be of three parts. So the first one is the exit access. That is, exit access is basically the path inside the building to the exit of the building. Okay, to the exit door of the building. So that path is called as exit access. So basically, it could be the corridors, it could be the aisles, etc. Exit is basically the protected route out. That is the route which is actually leading outside the building. So for example, it could be staircase, it could be doors, etc. So that is exit. And exit discharge is the final path to the outside. It could be street, it could be open area, etc. So there are three paths. So the first one is the exit access. Exit access is the path which leads to the exit. Exit is actually the door or the stairwell which takes you, which is a route, which is the protected route which takes you outside. And exit discharge is the safe path, is the final path to the outside area. So these are the three parts of a means of egress. So all these three parts must be protected, and they should be unobstructed at all times. Now, the golden rule for any life safety plan is that there should be at least two exits. That is, as I said before, redundancy is the only option to overcome this solution, to overcome this problem. So we need to have at least two exits. Now, what is the reason of having two exits? So fire can actually block one exit, okay, but not two exits at the same time, okay. So if, and these two exits needs to be properly separated if the fire should not catch for both the exits. So keep in mind, fire can only block one exit, okay, but not two if both the exits are spaced properly, okay, if they are separated properly. Now, two exits actually provide redundancy, and they can provide a choice also, okay. And occupants can choose the safer route based on the fire location. That is, the occupants can choose the staircase which is near to them, and which is near to them, which can actually lead them outside the building in a shorter response time. So two exits is actually a fundamental requirement for all fire codes in the world, okay. Now, what are the fire code requirements for exits? So the fire code requirements, we can actually go through some of the aspects of it. So the first one is regarding number of exits. So the number of exits is actually based on the occupant load and the building height. Okay, these are two factors that we need to know when we are dealing with the number of exits, when we need to determine the number of exits. So we need to know the occupant load, and we also need to know the building height. Based on these two parameters, the fire codes will be having a table, and will be having a table or a formula, and out from which we need to calculate the number of exits. Then the exit separation. So the exit separation is usually half the building's diagonal distance, okay. That is the distance of separation between the two exits. So exit separation is usually at least half the building's diagonal distance apart. And fire resistance rating. So the stairwells, that is staircases, staircases enclosed, staircase should be enclosed with fire rated walls and doors, and the fire rated walls and doors should be typically 1 to 2 hours. Then we have the unobstructed paths. That is, the exits must be clear. It should be unlocked, okay. It should be unlocked and should be clearly marked at all times. Now, the word unlocked, with respect to the incident, that is the Lucknow incident, we will be discussing that in some time, okay. Now, let us see what are the violations that happened in the Lucknow fire incident, with respect to the single point of failure. So the first observation was that in the building there was only one staircase available. Okay, that was a staircase which was used as the entry to the building, and that is the same staircase where the people can escape. There was no alternative route for escape. So there was no redundancy in the building. The second one is there is no exit separation. There's no second exit. There's no second alternative route for the building. So there is no question of exit separation. Okay. So the only exit was the only option to escape. Then there was no fire rated enclosure. Fire rated enclosure was not at all available in the building. Not only in the building, especially in the stairwell also there was no fire rated protection. So the smoke and the flames which were occurred, they actually engulfed the entire staircase within minutes. Then there was no emergency exits. Now the reason why there was no emergency exit, so there was no fire escape, and there was no external ladder, and there was no alternative routes. Then unobstructed. So the path, that is the building path, was actually was the building path unobstructed? Building path was not unobstructed, but the thing is that the doors which was there for the shops and the centers, they were actually locked. They were actually locked because of the biometric lock, because they used the fail secure locks, not the fail safe lock. That is, when the electricity got disconnected, the locks, instead of opening them, it actually remained closed, okay, and that actually backfired the escape plan of the occupants, and they got trapped inside. So these are some of the observations, these are some of the violations that the building got wrong. Now, when the stairwell became a chimney, that is because of the smoke and the fire, it was actually a huge chimney, and it was like a huge chimney. So the entire exit was actually filled with the flames and smoke. Okay, the protected enclosure, there was no protected enclosure in the building, because since there was no fire rating for the walls and the doors, so none of the rooms was actually a safe haven. Okay, it was not safe for the occupants to occupy themselves during the time of fire. The occupants had no other alternative except for jumping out of the building, climbing out of the building, or dying, climbing on the building or die. These were the three options which are available for the occupants. Then the firefighters, they could not use the stairwell to rescue. As I said, there was only one staircase to come inside the building. So the firefighters could not use that staircase because it was actually completely filled with smoke and fire, and they could not see also how they can go inside. Because of that, they had to actually drill. They had to actually make a hole in the side wall, make a hole in the wall, and then only they were able to enter. And then there was then there was another situation where they had to use the terrace of the neighboring wall and jump from there. So this was the only option which was available for the firefighters. And the if the firefighters delay means the number of occupants who will survive becomes less. So that is one issue that the Lucknow fire incident had faced. So the key takeaway is that if you need to have if you need to establish a proper life safety plan, one important aspect that we need to consider is redundancy. So if there is redundancy, what happens is, because of that, lives can be saved. Okay, people who are trapped inside the building, they can be saved. So multiple exits, they are not an option, they are an essential requirement, they're a fundamental requirement for any building design. So if one route fails, then another must exist. Okay, and that's not just the good design, it's actually the law. The law states that, the law requires that multiple exits needs to be there, redundant exits needs to be there, then only the people can escape. And every building must have at least two separate protected exits from every floor. Okay, that is very important. So that means every floor should have at least two separate protected exits. So with this, my video on the single point of failure comes to an end. I hope I hope the video was clear with regards to this concept. If there's any doubts, queries, questions, feedback regarding this particular video, please do share them in the comment section, and I will be happily obliged to respond to them. Uh, and before I sign off, I would humbly request all of you to kindly like, share, and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Engineering with Shamil. And your like, share, and your act of kindness will actually help me motivate to produce more content with regards to engineering. So thank you once again for listening, and I sign off, wishing all of you a good day ahead. Thank you.